Marcus Priority has some interesting results. Just the other day, yes, actually, it was just this morning. I was talking to my parents and I was talking about the gospel stories as they're revealed. And if you take Mark as being the first one written, it's very interesting. Many scholars take this view that Mark was the first gospel written. And one of the really interesting parts you see about this is how the resurrection stories appear. So Mark has an empty tomb with some young men. Yes, Bart, that's an empty tomb. And that's it. That's the end of the story. But Matthew, which is often dated much later, not as late as John, but later, Mark and Matthew adds a few things. First of all, he changes the young men into angels. That's interesting. But he also adds a story about the guards and a conspiracy theory about where the body went. And then all that story that we remember of Jesus' Great Commission given on a mountain in Galilee. Really changing up the story a little bit. But then we have Luke. Now, Luke is a very interesting twist on this. So if we said he has Mark in front of him, he says, what do I need to do? He says, I'm going to stick with the men and the empty tomb. Oh, just a little aside. This is a very interesting thing. All four Gospels always have women discovering the empty tomb. That is the one consistency with all four Gospels. And probably the only consistency is that it's always women who discover the empty tomb. But back to our Mark as a priority. So Luke adds to it in this way. So he has the men, and then he has a story about two men on the road to Emmaus. And Jesus appears to them, but they don't recognize him. And they chit-chat and they talk, and suddenly he breaks bread in front of them. Boom! Whoa! This was Jesus. And they run off, and then they have this little experience once they tell back in Jerusalem when they tell the other disciples about it. So he has another experience, a real in-body experience of where the disciples see. And then he has the great story of Jesus being ascended outside of Bethany. Interesting. So Matthew places the ascension in Galilee, but Bethany is just outside of Jerusalem, and that's where Luke places him. Not saying this is not historically true. I'm just saying it's interesting that they have two different details going on. Jesus. But John, in the Mark of Priority, is considered the latest gospel to be written. Maybe written about 90 or something CE. Depends how you date it and how you mark it. But let's just say it's late. So John adds to it even more. Yes, still has women, because women are always the key to this story. He has Jesus appear in body to Mary Magdalene, but like, whoa, don't touch me, don't touch me. I haven't returned to the Father yet. But he has two upper room experiences. And this is where we get the Doubting Thomas's story from. So we have, first of all, Jesus appearing to the 12. Actually, it's just the 10, because one of them missing. Thomas is missing. So a week later, they tell Thomas, we've seen the Lord. And he's like, I don't believe it. Dead people don't rise up. And then he shows up that week later. And that whole scene where Jesus is like, touch me, put your hand in my side and feel me. Which is totally different than his earlier interaction with Mary Magdalene, where he's like, don't touch me. Don't even put a finger on me, because I haven't returned to the Father yet. Which is very interesting. But John goes even more with another story. And this is where Jesus is out by the Lake of Galilee. And Peter and John and some other guys are out there fishing. And he gives them a miraculous catch of fish. And he tells them to come with their fish and have breakfast with him. And then he has this touching story in John 21 where Jesus reinstates Peter by restating 3 times that Jesus loves him and that Peter, loves Jesus, giving a beautiful ending to the Gospel of John. Now, I'm not saying that one is more historically accurate than the other, but it's interesting as time develops, as people get more time to think about the stories of, I remember this story, I remember this time, that the stories become more detailed and more complex.